I'm Nicole. I'm co-founder and chief designer of Let's Jetty. We are a group travel app, and our mission is to get the trip out of the group chat. When we first started Let's Jetty, it was my absolute dream. There were no approvals, no constraints. I had no idea who my audience was. I was just building for fun. And my co-founder and I were the only stakeholders, which I 10 out of 10 recommend. Be your own stakeholder. And it was really important to us that we build a brand that was fluid and expressive, something that could allow me to follow my curiosities wherever they wanted to go. Then we grew. We hired designers, I built a brand book, and it had all the usual suspects: logo, color, type, and the designers followed it perfectly. And that was the problem. The guidelines documented the decisions, the visual system, the output. I couldn't help but wonder, what if brand guidelines could do more than just document the system? And that question led me here. Consistency isn't about repetition. It's showing up in a way that feels real to you over and over again. Think about some of the most iconic brands of our time. They do not rely on rigid repetition for consistency. Everybody knows who they are. They don't have to use the same system. And they're busy building worlds. And these worlds are based on community, culture, and meaning. And that's why it's so easy to connect with them and they feel alive. So now the question becomes, how do we give our systems a soul? For this, and most of the questions I generally have in my life, the answer came to be in the form of 90s hip hop. Specifically this man right here, J Dilla. Thank you. Yeah, hell yeah. Okay. He produced some of the most iconic beats for Tribe Called Quest, Slum Village, Erykah Badu, D'Angelo. The list goes on. And he influenced so many important producers today. And if you listen closely to his beats, you'll hear something that feels slightly off. His earliest fans actually used the term erratic or drunken to describe his beats, but everybody was mesmerized nonetheless, because he did something really interesting. He redefined rhythm. He proved that time itself can be both felt and measured. So, traditionally, rhythm lives in two modes. You have straight time, it's perfectly on the grid, pretty predictable, steady. And then you have swing time. It's a little loose, a little more human, and it really relies on that push and pull of tension. But what Dilla did was introduce a third time feel, where he was juxtaposing straight time and swing time. And he did this by placing elements like the snare, the kick drum, the bass line, slightly ahead, slightly behind, and sometimes perfectly on the time grid, all at once and all in relation to each other. But here's the important part. He did not disregard the system. This is not him breaking the rules. Every beat, every note, every bar, every measure, it was incredibly intentional. It was exactly where it was supposed to be. He was engaging a system. So a lot of people describe him as a drummer using a machine, and he did play traditional instruments, and he actually came from a really long lineage of musicians, but he considered himself a programmer. He didn't use the machine to imitate a drummer. He was doing something way more interesting than that. He was exploring what happens when a human engages with a system so deeply that you create something entirely new, something that nobody had ever created before. So here's the general method to the madness, the evolution. You start with man-made instruments, machine-made, drum machine, keyboard machine, etc., and then man-engaging machine, Dilla time. And when I first read this, I started thinking about brand systems and how we're going through a similar evolution. We started off with what felt right, and then we became obsessed with how to optimize it and make it scalable and repeatable. But the most interesting work today isn't happening at either end of the extreme. It's happening in the space between, where human judgment starts to meet systems. So, how can we transform this metaphor from music to visual? I use these 3 frameworks in my workflow: archetypes, emotional territories, and reference galaxies, to engage the system and to reimagine brand guidelines. So let's start with archetypes. Okay, let's see a show of hands. How many of you structure your brand books like this? Thank you. Don't lie. You literally have the top 10% of strategy. You have purpose, values, maybe a page on audience, and it's like a paragraph. And then 90% of this document is rules. Rules on how to use logo, type, color, spacing. And after all of that strategy work, like months and months and months of strategy work that we put our blood, sweat, and tears into, we compress it into a single expression down the funnel: awareness, consideration, conversion, loyalty. And we show up down this funnel with one voice and one visual system. But what if instead of documenting a single expression, we documented a range of expressions? And what if our brand books were built to support that? So, this is my first addendum to the brand book for the council's approval. You're the council. I know we have these already, archetypes. They're not new. We have audience, we have persona. But here's the distinction. This is not a static paragraph or a marketing exercise that lives in your brand books, never to be seen or heard from again. This is a visual creative tool. So I'm going to walk you through the high-level framework, and then I'm going to go into how it shows up in my guidelines, and then I'll show you the outputs for comparison. So this is a structure from the bird's eye view. We start with who this person is, the archetype. And then we take a look at their thriving and surviving states. Because let's be real, we're not always thriving or surviving. And then this tells us what they need from the brand and what creative decisions that we can start making. And now we can start identifying where we can create rhythm inside the brand. So for Let's Jetty, we identified 3 core archetypes. We have the organizer, the contributor, and the Venmo friend. Now, I'm going to zoom in on the organizer for a second. This is, just to show you, this is an example of how it would show up in my guidelines. I would basically map out the values and then some of the thinking as a quick reference as I start jumping into my design process. So, the organizer. You probably know this person, or you are this person, in which case, I'm sorry, because you're coordinating schedules, you're answering a million questions in the group chat, and you're essentially carrying the emotional burden of the trip on your shoulders. And nobody asked you to do this, you just do it, and the trip wouldn't happen without you. So, on the left, I've mapped out what matters to them most. In this case, it's trust, confidence, participation. And then on the right, I'm documenting a little bit of their thinking, high level, who they are, what they look like when they're thriving and when they're surviving, and what external and internal factors impact those states. And then from that, emotional needs just start to emerge. So once I understand those needs, I make this is an example of a quick mood board I would make for the organizer in their thriving state. And I can start translating them into a visual expression. She needs recognition, and we want to make her the hero. And this directly affects the output. So I use a little bit more white space, and I explore type pairings that complement the core system, but don't live there full time. They're just renting. So I use imagery that puts her at the center. And then as we shift into the opinionated contributor, this person, they have taste and they have opinions. And they're the ones reading the reviews, finding the best option available. But here's the thing, they don't want to make the final decision, they just want to share their ideas and preferences with the group and have the group decide. So the creative shifts from recognition to collaboration. So for an example of UI that I would highlight our polls feature, and that just kind of becomes like a focal point of the creative. And the Venmo friend. This is my favorite archetype because I'm the Venmo friend. Um, you're basically just here from the memories. You're not really helping that much with the planning. You're just saying, hey, let me know when and where. I'm there. I'll Venmo you. So they typically just go with the flow. And here's the thing. When things get overwhelming, they start to disappear and they start to ghost. And, when they're in that surviving state. So this is an example of how I would design for like that scenario. So the creative shifts again to a softer, more playful, nostalgic feel. And our role as the brand starts shifting into making them feel welcome to come back into the app and excited. And now we're focused on making it easy for them to jump back in. Okay, so now imagine I just ignored all of that archetype nonsense and I just used the toolkit that I showed you in the beginning. This is closer to the output that I would probably make, right? Get the trip out of the group chat, girls on a beach. And here's the thing, there's nothing wrong with this necessarily. It's consistent, it's on brand, it follows the rules, but it cannot be the same answer every single time. And the difference isn't that one way is right and one way is wrong. It's just that one system is optimizing for consistency and another system is optimizing for elasticity. And when you really think about it, all of those examples I just showed you, they're not drastically different. The first one, I just added 2 new typefaces. The second one, I added a new color, and you didn't even notice. And the third, I added hand-drawn elements and stars. And just to be clear, I'm not suggesting that we create a new visual system for every single campaign or every asset. Although, why not? Who's stopping us? Let's be real. But I am suggesting that we understand the system deeply enough to know where it can bend and where we can flex. Where can we push certain elements ahead, let others drift slightly behind, and leave others perfectly on the time grid? This is how you start creating your own rhythm inside the brand. And we give ourselves permission to move past creative briefs, past funnels, past KPIs, into something more memorable and something that people can really connect with in that moment. So if archetypes help us understand who we're designing for, emotional territories help us understand how they're experiencing the moment. Traditional brand systems optimize for consistency. They're rule-driven and they're focused on repetition to build brand equity. I just use a lot of buzzwords. But as we shift from this boring black and white side into this fun, colorful side, we start to move beyond rules into judgment and impact. So my second addendum to the guidelines is emotional territories. So once again, I'm going to start with frameworks, guidelines, and then how they influence the creative decision. So for each territory, I define 3 things: how people feel, what role the brand should play, and what behaviors support that role. Every brand is solving a problem, but people experience that problem differently depending on where they are in the journey. And look, we already create user journeys for product design, right? We spend so much time understanding goals, motivations, pain points throughout the journey. And because I work on both product and brand design, I couldn't separate those 2 processes. So I applied the same logic from the user journeys to the brand expression. And this is how it just starts showing up in my guideline, basically as a glorified mood board for right now. So I'll start with the spark. I have the emotion, the brand role, the behaviors, and then I start to play around with visual expression that complements the core system, but once again, doesn't live in the book full time. It's a visualization of the journey work that we've already done, but we're just translating needs, emotions, and behaviors into direction. So, starting with the spark. At this stage, the emotion is excitement. Our role is to be the catalyst for inspiration. We need to keep the momentum going, and we need to get them to commit early on so that they can continue to be excited throughout the planning process. But as we shift into coordination chaos, the audience isn't looking for inspiration anymore. They're looking for answers. Who's coming? What are the dates? Where are we staying? So the visual language shifts from chaos to clarity. And by finalization, everything is booked, you can breathe, and the brand is just trying to build anticipation and confidence by making everything more tangible. And once again, if I had stuck to the guidelines, this is closer to the output that I probably would have made, because brand systems document the rules. But with these frameworks, I'm trying to document creative judgment. Because once you document who they are, what they're feeling, what they need, the system stops being a collection of dusty, fragmented assets, never to be seen or heard from again, but they start to become intelligence. Okay, so at this point, you're probably wondering, Nicole, this is just a bunch of static mood boards and frameworks, and I thought you were going to show something interactive. And I am, in the next slide. But before I get there, I want to acknowledge that we already do this work. We do the audience research, we do the journey mapping, we do the exploration. The problem isn't that we aren't doing the thinking or the work. It's that all of that thinking gets compressed into one system and one single output. So the artifact survives, but the reasoning doesn't. So I've been noticing something really cool in the industry lately. The way we're discovering inspiration is changing. It feels like there's this collective desire to move away from static mood boards and Pinterest into something that's more dynamic and spatial. When I first started putting this talk together, I really wanted to create my own mood board like this and call it a reference galaxy because it just sounds really cool and it looks really cool. But I was struggling to make meaning of it. And I was really struggling to find a purpose beyond it just being cool. So I had an interesting conversation with some folks at Figma, and I was explaining this reference galaxy idea to them, and they encouraged me to explore Weave. And no, this is not a plug. I genuinely really enjoyed using it. And I started feeding it these static frameworks. And at first, I thought it was going to help me generate that reference galaxy, mood board, campaign assets, perhaps. But it did something way more interesting than that. It was developing relationships between the different facets of the brand, and I could see all of these ideas living in the same system. It was using the research and the strategy that I created to make these layers visible, instead of just sitting across PDFs and Figma files. And it was a system that started documenting the patterns in those relationships. So my brand book started becoming creative intelligence. And the funny part is that I talked about this in the beginning, right? Man-made, machine-made, man-engaging machine. But now there's another stage, machine-engaging man. And I discovered this through playing around with Figma Weave and exploring different possibilities. When I first started this talk, I wasn't trying to design a new framework or anything like that. I was just trying to design a better brand book and a more useful guideline. But along the way, through my research and discovery, it stopped being about guidelines and rules, and it started really showing the relationships between the brand facets. And this is also why Dilla really inspired this talk. He wasn't interested in escaping the machine. He was interested in engaging with it, in learning its rules and its constraints, and then creating something human inside of them, elasticity inside structure. And when I read Dilla Time, I read this quote, and it just deeply resonated with me because it just felt so relevant to where we are in the industry right now as designers. And also, it makes it just beautifully poetic that his favorite movie is The Matrix, because this is inspired by it. Technology is doing something strange to human beings. As we move further away into the machine age, we'll continue to have to find our humanity within it, to find a way to maximize its potential for the positive. So are you punching through the grid, or are you trapped in it? And once again, his favorite movie was The Matrix, and I just find that beautifully poetic because he saw himself inside Neo, someone moving between worlds, someone learning the rules of the system just so that he could bend them. And as designers, we're entering a world filled with more systems, more intelligence, more tools than ever before. And the question isn't whether we're going to use them or not. The question is what we're going to do with them. Dilla didn't use the machine to sound human. He used it to create something that had never existed before. And maybe that's the opportunity in front of us too. Yep. Thank you.